G'day everyone, welcome back to our ongoing podcast series supported by the Ferros Institute. I'd like to welcome a key contributor to the book, In Good Hands, Leadership Conversations About Our Times. I'd like to present Daniel Fletcher. Daniel, thank you for joining us, mate.
No problem, Eric. Pleasure to be with you.
Look, I appreciate your contribution to the book, and just by way of introduction for those either listening to or watching the pod, that Daniel is the GM of Community and Livability at Western Downs Regional Council here in the great state of Queensland. Where else would you want to live? And he's also, amongst other roles, the president of the Local Government Managers Association of Queensland. Have I got that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so Daniel, why your contribution to the book? Why did you feel it was important, mate?
Oh, well, great question to kick off. And I think my role primarily at Western Downs here is transcending a lot of change, not just specifically in local government, but our region has a strong history of farming and agriculture, and we're seeing the future look, well, for us anyway, look a little bit different where we're starting to coexist. We have been coexisting, I should say, with industries that are less traditional. That's the coal seam gas in particular, but even more and more increasingly now renewable energy. So one of those elements from a local government perspective, but more broadly a public sector perspective, is really understanding the shoulders that we're standing on from the people that came before us, understanding what it is that we're doing right now and how that's going to prepare future generations for whether leadership looks like in the public sector space, but just more generally understanding that transitional phase. And I think in some respects we've done well to learn from the past. In others, we're still struggling to get that right. And again, in other respects, we're doing a good job planning for the future. But again, it's not easy. And I think that cycle of the looking back, standing on the shoulders, understanding what we're doing right now, and who are we helping to stand up on our shoulders right now as well, and how does that look 10, 15 years from now when they look back on what the decisions that we made, but not just what decisions were made, but how did we make those decisions? I think that's really been something occupying my mind for a long time, and I was felt privileged to be able to contribute to the book in a weird way to sort of indirectly talk to those things.
No, look, I appreciate the honesty of that answer, the complexity around what it is that you're talking about, community change, expectations in your community, how you lead people through that without throwing away or disrespecting where you came from, because that comes out quite strongly in what you wrote. But I'll put something to you because I read and reread your chapter before we met, and three things kind of stuck out for me. And given your role in your community, so we'll use that as the benchmark for this, as far as you can talk to this, that government is definitely not business, it's government for a reason. The second one being that ethics is critical in how you do what you do, and representing but not advocating necessarily for the interests of your community is critical in what you do. That's what I got out of it. So not that the advocacy bit is not important, but you're advocating for an entire community rather than one subset of that community. So how does all that? I'm assuming that all is still relevant to your current role.
Yeah, I think those are definitely three key themes that I had littered throughout and probably occupy my space, if not daily, certainly weekly. Yeah, I think the first one you spoke about, where government is not a business. I guess I've always got to be mindful of how I represent certain things, and characterizing government as a business is a very dangerous concept. If I bring it back, um, the most important thing about government is we are here to create public value, and that means the well-being of society. When you understand the shareholders from a public perspective, it is people that are not necessarily owning or contributing to purchasing the shares, but you still need to look after them all the same. One of the elements that I often talk to, one of the very critical reasons as to why, if I just focus on local government, we're not a business. If that was the case, we would see our elected member bodies largely approve, endorse, accept the recommendations of the subject matter experts. But that doesn't happen. I don't say that in an insensitive way. What we need to understand when we contemplate this is there is good information which professionals need to provide the elected member body. They receive that good information, and I often characterize this is the science. So we get the evidence, we get the data, and we present that in as objective, as neutral, as independent as we can to the elected member group. When they get the science, they introduce a new layer of political science. And it's this evidence-based versus evidence-informed decision-making that we really need to understand better in the public sector, because what the evidence might suggest, when it's layered with the political view, doesn't necessarily mean that the data and the evidence is the right way to go. It might mean that there has to be a slight shift based on a particular community, based on a particular point in time, where that political science layer, and only the elected members can do that. It deviates from, well, the data and the evidence says this, but we're just going to take a slight deviation from what that data and that evidence says, and that's going to be the best outcome for us. And when I refer to that as, well, the evidence says X, but that's evidence-based decision. If we use an evidence-informed decision-making methodology, it means that the councillors are looking at the evidence, but they're also bringing all of this other experience, knowledge, understanding, belief, commentary and conversations that they've had with lots of different local people that they can then infiltrate that evidence with to make a richer outcome. And it's a really difficult moment to, in some respects, to share that back with the subject matter experts to say, while no one's disputing the strength of what you put forward, it's just going to take a slight deviation. And I think that's a really critical, piece to understand, so that we don't confuse business with government. And if, for example, this is a really simple example that is probably overused. From a local government perspective, we operate things like libraries and aquatic centres. Now, if you were to pay your entry fee for an aquatic centre, which was at the very least a cost recovery, if not a profit-generating entry fee, nobody would ever attend. Everybody would just buy a pool for their own backyard. If we were to charge you out the cost recovery, or better yet, a slight surplus to borrow a book from our library, nobody would ever borrow a book. So that distinction between this is a public value offering, which everybody has to pay for, but not everybody uses, is the really clear distinction between that public value. It's the practical distinction between what governments have to do and why we're not a business. And I think the rhetoric we've seen over the last, let's call it multiple decades, is there are more elected member beliefs, not just in local government. This transcends state, federal, it transcends international as well, where people think we should be running governments like a business. We elect business leaders thinking they'll be good to run government. And I mean, there's a couple of questions that we often ask ourselves: is that person actually a good business leader based on what? And does that successful business approach translate to government? Almost exclusively, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a great response. There's a couple of things to take out of that for anyone uh, thinking about leadership or their own leadership practice. It's that never assume you fully understand the other side that you're dealing with unless you've taken the time to really appreciate where they're coming from. And what I mean by that is that layer that you talk about, the political science, the politics of local councils that are run by elected individuals, they have the final say because they are in effect the board of their communities,
Mm.
and they have their own agendas and own vision for where the place is going to go. I think expectations of industry or about what the local government officers and those that work in councils can do for them to get the outcome that they're after is a typical business mentality, but they may not like the answer they get at the end because ultimately the decision maker is may not be a council officer, but maybe a political appointee to the council, to the chamber. And yeah, I get where you're coming from. I have probably not lived it as much as you because I only spent a little bit of time with LGAQ and I've never worked in a council, but I would see the frustration and the challenge of leadership on your side of the table. But flip that over, what has government at all levels done to really educate the business community about what it means to deal with the council, with the state government, with the feds? Because the layers of accountability, the layers of the understanding the focus of government is not the focus of business. When you start getting those things confused, then things don't go the right way. So yeah, 100% love that response. So Daniel, before we go, I wanted to ask you, and I could have made this a generic question, but I'll couch it around local government with your permission. What do you believe from a council-wide perspective, not your council, but councils in general, what's the top three leadership issues you see coming down the pipeline?
Do you mean the leadership challenges that we're struggling with, or
Yes, yes.
yeah?
Yep, yep.
Um, I think, and it probably talks to that second point as well around the criticality of ethics. I think, and I want to be very clear in how I represent this. I'm not suggesting that people are struggling with, or individuals are struggling with ethics. I think that is a constant challenge where, and if I explain the dynamic between an elected member group where their only employee is the CEO, every other employee in the organization is employed through the CEO. I mean, there has been a slight change in legislation in Queensland for second level appointments more recently, but I really don't think that has had any change on this concept around making sure that everything we do is centered around a doable, defendable, and repeatable concept. Because if we can't defend in an ethical way why we did something, it really shouldn't be repeated. And I know that there are lots of moments where not just CEOs, but other senior leaders in local government are challenged with, this is the path presented to us. Is it one that we can stand up, defend ourselves, and repeat in the future with an ethical lens on it? And I think that the reality of that becomes, because there are a divergence of views in the council chamber and in the boardroom, which is a great thing. It's making sure that one of those views, or potentially multiple of those views, are within, and what I guess I refer to this as, is that it's a big paddock with really strong fences. So you can maneuver your views and your path and your direction, as long as you don't break those strong fences. Stay within that big paddock that's provided amongst the Local Government Act and the regulations and all the policies that councils might have. And it's really easy. But once a view or once a particular path starts to really crack that strong fence, yeah, there's a real challenge around getting it right. The second one I think would be future focused thinking. Now, largely I think this is obvious because we run in cycles. So it's very easy for those short-term wins. So, the ribbon cutting moments, making sure we hit a surplus every year, those kind of things are that operational cadence of getting right. But I think we become really challenged with, well, what does this look like in 5 or 10 years? And how are we actually preparing not only ourselves, but our organization, our workforce, our systems, our processes for 5 or 10 years from now? And what we've seen in the last maybe 5 to 10 years is some really serious pivoting of organizations having to update their systems and their technology because they didn't prepare well enough that 5 or 10 years previously. It's a really hard thing to do, invest that time, effort, and in many instances money into that 5 or 10 year horizon. And I'd say that the third one for me is almost linked to the first one, but it's around choosing courage over comfort. And this is a general leadership concept around you're going to have difficult conversations. You're going to with staff members, with community members, and it's always the easiest or the path of least resistance to take an aligned approach and be comfortable. But we need to really focus on what is the courageous thing to do here and lean into that every single time, because what we see, the cascading effect both ways. If you take comfort once, you'll take it a second and third time, and that then becomes the pervasive, and it becomes permissible too in the organization to choose that easy path. Whereas if you're one of the leaders and you're doing the courageous work and you're having the difficult conversations, and this is across the spectrum of with staff, it could be with an elected member and certainly with community members, that should, just as the comforting path does, it should create a cascading effect where people see that and that they embody it, they understand it's the right thing to do, and you get benefits in the long term. Very hard to do, but it's probably one of the things, if one of the three that in my response to your answer is really important.
That's excellent, Daniel. Look, I appreciate those words of wisdom to end the discussion. So, mate, thank you for your time, and I'll let you get back to what probably is another busy day for you, sir. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Eric, thank you so much.
For those listening, this has been the Pharos Institute podcast series, speaking to contributors to the book In Good Hands, Leadership Conversations About Our Times. Thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.